Christian Wellesley, a 35-year-old man, was driving his Lamborghini through the streets of Manhattan. But contrary to what most people would imagine about a multimillionaire, he did not feel the euphoria that his wealth should provide. The roar of the powerful engine echoed through the city streets as he glided through them with the ease of someone who had the world at his feet. However, his distant gaze and serious expression betrayed a sense of disconnection. He had everything that many dream of: a dream car, an imposing mansion, designer clothes, but inside him there was an emptiness. As the skyscrapers of Manhattan rose up around him, Christian could not ignore the feeling of loneliness that accompanied him. The busy streets, the luxurious stores, the familiar faces everywhere he turned. He was already tired of this life. His business was doing well, his parties were always full, and he was never alone. But the feeling of being lost in the midst of so much ostentation consumed him. He never thought that something as grand as his fortune would leave him so empty. "I should be happy, right?" Christian thought, looking at the reflections in the shop windows around him. "I have everything anyone could want, so why don't I feel complete?" The car continued its journey through the vibrant streets of Manhattan, but he was increasingly distant from the city, from his work, from his success. Christian was searching for something he couldn't name, something that would make him feel truly alive, but it seemed to be out of his reach. He was so immersed in his own doubts and questions that he barely noticed the city becoming more opaque before his eyes. Passing through a busy square, he stopped at a traffic light. The sound of the Lamborghini's engine became softer as the car slowed down. It was at that moment that something unexpected caught his attention. Christian stopped again at the intersection, his heart beating faster than usual. He looked out the window and saw the woman with the 4 children. They were playing happily on the sidewalk, running and laughing, but the image that caught his attention the most was the fact that they were so identical to him. They were not only similar in some features, but in the details, the shape of their faces, the way they looked, even the way they walked. Something about that moment made Christian feel like he could no longer ignore what was happening. He didn't know what to expect, but something was urging him to get closer. With a quick movement, he parked the Lamborghini next to the sidewalk. He observed the woman, who seemed oblivious to his presence. She had her head down, probably lost in her own thoughts while the children played. Christian took a deep breath, and before he could think of anything else, got out of the car and went to her. "Hey, excuse me," Christian said, his voice firm but with a hint of curiosity. The woman looked up quickly, and he noticed the expression of surprise on her face when she saw him standing there. She had a serene countenance, but there was an aura of concern emanating from her, as if she was always on alert. She was silent for a moment, as if she were assessing who this imposing man, who had just approached her, was. Christian didn't want to wait any longer, and asked directly, "Who is the father of these children?" The question, so direct and blunt, made Elizabeth hesitate. She looked at the children, who were now standing still, watching curiously the elegant man who stood before her. The children had the same confused expression, as if they were trying to understand what was happening. Elizabeth looked nervous, the line of her jaw tightening as she adjusted the bag on her shoulder. She looked at Christian, her eyes filled with a mixture of caution and frustration. "Why do you want to know?" she asked, her tone defensive, as if she wanted to push him away immediately. It was clear that this conversation was not on her list of priorities, but Christian's insistence seemed to make the situation inevitable. I just need to know," Christian replied, feeling uneasy. "These children, they're so much like me. I need to understand." Elizabeth stared at him for a moment, her face impassive. She clearly wasn't willing to share much, but something about the situation seemed to disturb her. Her eyes softened for a moment, and she sighed, as if she were preparing to reveal something she knew was important. They don't have a father, she said, her voice low but firm, as if that was the only explanation she could give at that moment. Christian frowned, more confused than ever. "They don't have a father?" he repeated, as if he couldn't believe what he had just heard. "But they're so much like me. It doesn't make sense." Elizabeth looked at the children again, her eyes shining with sadness. "They don't have a father," she repeated. "And they never did." Those words echoed in Christian's mind like an unsolved mystery. He felt more confused by the second, but his curiosity only grew. How could the children look so much like him when she claimed they had no father? He needed more answers, and now, more than ever, he was determined to find a way for them. Christian stared at the children, unable to understand what was happening. They played and smiled, oblivious to the conversation, but he couldn't take his eyes off them. Every gesture, every movement seemed like a reflection of himself. Their hearts beat in sync, and the children's facial features were unmistakably similar to his own. The dark brown hair, the shape of their faces, the sparkle in their eyes. The sense of familiarity was so strong that he could hardly believe what he was seeing. I need to know more," Christian said, his voice thick with disbelief. He was no longer just curious, he was worried. Something inside him told him there was more to it than Elizabeth was willing to reveal. He stepped a little closer, his eyes now fixed on the children, trying to find an answer in their faces. "How is that possible? How can they be so much like me? You have to tell me the truth." Elizabeth realized the intensity of his words and took a step back, as if she wanted to protect herself from something. Her eyes were fixed on him, but there was a glint of distrust. She looked at the children, who continued to play, completely ignoring the tense atmosphere that was forming between her and that insistent man. "I already told you," she replied, her tone colder now. "My children don't have a father." She crossed her arms, almost as a gesture of defense, as if trying to shield herself from an uncomfortable conversation. "They don't have a father, because I am the only one responsible for them. I am all they need." Christian couldn't take his eyes off the children. That explanation didn't make sense. He wanted to believe that he was seeing some kind of mistake, maybe a coincidence, but he couldn't deny what his eyes saw. It was as if the children were little versions of himself, and he couldn't understand the mystery behind it all. He had met many people throughout his life, but nothing had prepared him for the feeling of instant connection he felt with these children. "There's no way it's just that," he said, his eyes now fixed on Elizabeth. "These children are mine. I feel it." His voice was almost desperate, as if he were trying to find an answer that would explain this inexplicable bond. "You have to tell me what happened." Elizabeth looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of anger and sadness. She sighed deeply and for a moment seemed to hesitate. What she was about to say was not something easy to admit, but looking at the intensity in Christian's eyes, she knew she couldn't keep lying. "You won't understand," she said, almost whispering, but her tone was final. "I'm an immigrant. I came from Mexico and did my best to raise my children on my own. I went through fertility treatments 5 years ago because I wanted to have children. It wasn't easy, but I did it for me, and I did it for them." Her words made Christian pause. The truth was beginning to take shape, but something was still missing. He watched Elizabeth's face closely, and there was something in her eyes that conveyed a pain he couldn't ignore. He understood what she was saying, but he still couldn't put the pieces of the puzzle together. "So, you did IVF?" Christian asked, doubt now echoing in his voice. He couldn't believe what he was hearing, but something inside him told him he had to keep going. Elizabeth closed her eyes for a moment, as if trying to find the strength to continue. "Yes," she finally said, her voice quieter now. "I did. But I never imagined the donation would come from someone like you." Christian felt the impact of her words. He stood there in shock, trying to process what he had just heard. The pieces were finally falling into place. He didn't know how, but he knew that those children, those 4 children playing on the sidewalk, were his. And that changed everything. Christian could no longer hide the confusion in his eyes. It all seemed so surreal, but at the same time, there was an undeniable clarity. He needed more answers, and the only person who could provide them was standing right in front of him. He looked at Elizabeth with an intensity he didn't usually show. His thoughts were racing, as if everything he had known up until that moment was being turned upside down. "Elizabeth, tell me something," he began, trying to control his voice, which was almost breathless. "Did you have fertility treatment at a clinic? A clinic called Genesis Clinic? Did you do it there by any chance?" Elizabeth raised her eyebrows, surprised by the question. She hadn't expected him to know so much, and the concern in his eyes was evident. But before she could think of a response, he continued, once again focusing on the children. Those children were his. There was no denying it anymore. The feeling inside Christian was a mix of panic and wonder. He had children. Children he had never known existed. "Yes, I did," she replied with a cautious expression. "But how did you... Do you already know about Genesis Clinic?" Christian shook his head, still processing. The name of that clinic was important. He knew about their practices, and for some reason, the coincidence was too great to ignore. He had been there years ago, at a dark time in his life, when a series of problems had led him to make the decision to have a vasectomy. The fact that he was here now, face to face with 4 children who were undoubtedly his, made no sense. The discovery was overwhelming him, but there was one thing he could not ignore. These children were his family. I heard some stories about that clinic. I've been there in the past too, but I couldn't imagine that. He looked at the little ones, still playing, their faces so similar to his, and it hit him. "You don't understand, Elizabeth. They're my biological children. It's impossible, but it's real." Elizabeth looked at him with a mixture of surprise and a twinge of fear. She knew this situation was getting out of her control. She didn't know if she should trust this man, but something in her heart told her he was being sincere. The sadness and confusion in his eyes touched her in an inexplicable way. She wasn't sure what the future held for her and her children, but now, in front of Christian, it felt like a new door was opening. "I know this is a lot to take in," Christian continued, his eyes fixed on Elizabeth, "but I can't just ignore it. I don't know how I'm going to explain this, but you and your children are in my life now, and I want to help. I want to be a part of it, if you'll let me." Elizabeth took a step back, her distrust more evident than ever. She wasn't ready to trust anyone, much less a millionaire with a flashy past. She was an independent woman, and she had built her life on her own, despite all the hardships. She looked at the children, who were playing, not knowing what was happening. Fear and insecurity took over her. "You can have all the money in the world, Christian," she said with a firmness that reflected her daily struggle. "But that doesn't mean you can just walk into my children's lives and mine as if nothing had happened. They don't need luxury. They need love." Christian took a step forward, but her fear was clear. He could understand what she felt, but the desire to help was stronger than any obstacle. He knew he couldn't force trust, but he was willing to give her and the children whatever they needed. "I understand what you mean, Elizabeth," he said, his voice softer now. "But I want you to know that what I offer goes beyond the material. I want to be a part of their lives, to be a father to these children. I can help you, give you whatever you need, and I want to be there for you, not just as a millionaire, but as someone who cares." She looked at him with eyes full of uncertainty. Christian could see the pain she hid behind her strong facade. He knew that for her, trusting a man like him was nearly impossible. but something inside him told him that he had to try, for her and for the children. I don't know, Christian, she replied, shaking her head slowly. But maybe you're right. Maybe what we need is not what we have, but what we can be for each other. With a deep sigh, she looked at the children again, feeling a mixture of relief and hesitation. She knew he wanted to help her, but her fear was still great. Christian saw the moment of weakness in her eyes and knew that perhaps the only way she would trust him was with time. But he was in no rush. He had time now. "I want to take you to my home, Elizabeth," he finally said, as a silent proposal, hoping she would accept what he was offering. "Let me take care of you. I will do my best to make your lives better." Elizabeth looked at him suspiciously, but something in her heart made her accept. She knew she was taking a risk, but she couldn't ignore what was in front of her. With a hesitant gesture, she nodded. "Okay, but don't think everything will be easy," she said, her voice low but full of courage. "I'm not the kind of woman who lets herself be carried away by someone's promises." Christian smiled, knowing the road would be long, but he was willing to walk it. He held out his hand to her, and without another word, the two of them walked together towards the future, with the children running around, unaware of the revolution that was about to happen in their lives. Christian's car slid through the streets of Manhattan, taking Elizabeth and her 4 children to a destination none of them could have ever imagined. Elizabeth looked out the window, her thoughts a whirlwind of emotions. She didn't know what to expect from this man. He seemed so far from her reality, a millionaire with a life of luxury and ostentation, while she came from a difficult past, marked by a constant struggle to survive and take care of her children. But at the same time, there was something about him that made her doubt her own certainties. The way he talked about his children, as if they were already a part of his life, made her feel something she hadn't felt in years. The idea of being cared for, of being supported, was something she had given up on when her marriage failed. Elizabeth looked at her children in the back seat. They were quiet, curious, but still didn't understand what was happening. The little ones, with their brown hair and intense eyes, looked out the window with the same uncertainty that she felt. But at the same time, there was a glow of happiness on their faces, as if they somehow knew something good was about to happen. Elizabeth's thoughts were interrupted when the car turned a corner and she saw in the distance the huge golden gate that led to Christian's mansion. What had seemed like a distant dream was now becoming a tangible reality. When the car pulled up in front of the mansion, the doorman opened the gate with a solemn gesture, and the driver pulled up in front of the house. The mansion was immense, with classical and imposing architecture. The marble walls gleamed in the afternoon sun, and the gardens around it were lush, full of colorful flowers and well-tended shrubs. Christian got out of the car first, and as Elizabeth and the children began to file out, he turned to them with a serene smile. "Welcome to your father's house," he said, his words heavy with meaning. Elizabeth looked at him, surprised by the simplicity of his words, but something warmed her. She looked at her children, who were more excited than ever when they saw the garden. They ran around in the grass, laughing and playing as if they were in an amusement park. Elizabeth's heart sank when she saw them so happy. She knew that deep down, they deserved more than the simple life she could offer them, but at the same time, a part of her still resisted the idea of giving in to this new reality. "I never thought I would live in a place like this," she murmured to Christian, still in disbelief at what was happening. Christian smiled, but there was something else in his eyes, something deeper than simple empathy. He knew that this moment meant much more to Elizabeth than she could express. She was here, with her children, being given a chance she never imagined, and he was not about to let her walk away from his life so easily. "I know this is a big step, Elizabeth," he said sincerely, "but please know that my offer is from the heart. I want you to have everything you deserve." As he spoke, The children were having fun in the gardens, running around, exploring every corner of the place. The green grass and towering trees looked like they were part of a fairy tale setting, something Elizabeth's children could never have imagined. They were so happy, so innocent, that Elizabeth almost felt the weight of the world lift a little. But there was still a part of her that couldn't let go completely. She turned to Christian, her eyes serious. "It's not about the house, Christian," she said, her voice firm but thick with emotion. I need to know that you'll be there for them, not just with what you have, but with who you are. They don't need more things. They need love and stability." Christian looked into her eyes, feeling the weight of her words. He knew she was talking about something much bigger than just material comfort. She was talking about trust, about truth, and he felt a huge responsibility. He approached Elizabeth, his eyes determined. "I understand, Elizabeth," he said softly, "and I won't let you down. I'll be there for you. I'll be more than just a rich man. I'll be someone you can trust. And from now on, you won't have to worry about what's missing. I'll be here. Always." Christian looked at Elizabeth with a soft smile, but his eyes reflected a silent concern. The idea of introducing Elizabeth and the children to his grandmother had been on his mind for some time, but he knew it was more than a simple gesture. His grandmother, Clara, had always been the pillar of his life. Now aging and bedridden in a private suite in the mansion, she could barely move without the help of nurses and assistants. What he didn't know was how much this meeting could change everyone's destiny. "Come on, Elizabeth," he said, trying to sound confident, though the tension in his chest was visible. "I want you to meet my grandmother. She's very special to me." Elizabeth felt a sense of nervousness rise within her. She already knew that Christian was a powerful man, but meeting his grandmother, a figure she probably revered, and now so fragile, made her feel even more awkward and out of place. She held her children's hands, who were excited but also a little uneasy at the change of scenery. They walked down a long hallway to an imposing door where a nurse was waiting for them with a welcoming look on her face. "She's waiting for you," the woman said, opening the door with a smile. Upon entering, Elizabeth was immediately struck by the sense of silence and serenity. Soft candlelight illuminated the details of the suite, which felt more like a sanctuary than a sick room. There, in the large, cozy bed, lay Clara Wellesley. Her hair, now snow-white, was carefully arranged. Her skin was delicate, almost transparent, and her light blue eyes were slightly clouded by pain but still shone with immense wisdom. She smiled when she saw Christian enter, and her expression softened when she saw Elizabeth and the children, who were standing a little way off, watching curiously. "Ah, my dear grandson," Clara said in a hoarse but tender voice. "Finally, you have brought me the visitor I have been waiting for." Christian approached her, taking her hand carefully. "Grandmother, this is Elizabeth and her children," he said, his voice light, trying to ease the tension he knew Elizabeth felt. "They are part of our family now." Clara looked at the children with a surprised expression. Her eyes softened immediately, and she raised her head with difficulty, as if an invisible burden had been lifted from her shoulders. She held out her hands to the children, who hesitated for a moment, but then quickly approached her, as if the attraction to her energy was inevitable. "Elizabeth, your children. They have a special light, something I can't describe, but I feel it. As if somehow they've been part of our family for a long time." Clara's voice was shaking, but she spoke with a clarity that seemed to move between worlds. "I can't walk around anymore, but I know my blessing will accompany them." Elizabeth, with tears in her eyes, felt a warmth in her heart when she heard those words. Never before had anyone looked at her and her children with such affection, as if their lives were a gift for everyone. The children were enchanted by Christian's grandmother, who smiled at them with touching sincerity. "What a joy to feel this light in your presence," Clara continued, with a calm and deep smile. My grandchildren, one day perhaps you will understand what this means. And, Elizabeth, you and your children have a great mission ahead of you. You are not alone. The life you now share with my grandson, with Christian, will be full of challenges, but also of indescribable beauty. She paused, watching the children with affection. I bless you. May your love always be stronger than the difficulties. May you find in Christian and in our family the support you need to create something wonderful. And may you never forget where you come from. Christian stood there silent, watching his grandmother with a deep feeling of gratitude. He did not know exactly what he expected from this meeting, but seeing his grandmother so moved, so connected to those children who, until yesterday, he had not even known existed, made him feel a peace he had never experienced before. Elizabeth, now with tears in her eyes, looked at Christian. I never imagined I could have an experience like this, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I never thought my life and the lives of my children would touch so many people at once. Christian looked at her tenderly, squeezing her hand. Sometimes life surprises us, Elizabeth. And today, it brought you to us. Clara, who had been watching everything with a serene smile, looked at Christian with a look full of pride. You didn't know it, my dear, but now you are being guided by something greater than yourself, and you have all the resources in the world, but the most important thing is what you are building together. That is true wealth. Elizabeth approached Clara, thanking her with a shy smile. Thank you. Really. And, as the children played around Clara's bed, their laughter filling the room, everyone felt that something great was about to begin, something that would be, for each of them, a new beginning. Elizabeth looked at Christian with a mixture of surprise and gratitude, her hands still holding her children's, as if she were trying to find a response to the unexpected gesture he had just made. She knew that his proposal was more than just words of comfort. He was offering a different future, something she had never imagined could happen in her life. She took a deep breath. The weight of the responsibilities and challenges she had faced in the last few years seeming to be momentarily lifted by Christian's kindness. I don't know what to say, Christian, she murmured, her eyes shining, not knowing how to express all the emotion that was building up in her chest. Christian, with a determined and firm gaze, did not waver. You don't have to say anything, Elizabeth. I saw what I needed to see. I can't let you go back to that small house where I know life is not easy. I won't allow your children to grow up in a place where they don't get what they deserve. He looked at the 4 little ones who were playing enthusiastically in the mansion's gardens, and his gaze softened. They deserve more, much more. Elizabeth felt a pang of disbelief. She had never imagined that someone like Christian Wellesley, a man so far removed from her reality, could understand what she and her children had been through. But there, in the luxurious mansion full of history, she felt that something would change. Something that she didn't know how to manage yet, but that somehow seemed like the only chance to guarantee a better future for her children. I will give them everything they need, Elizabeth, Christian continued, his voice low but full of conviction. And more than that, I will provide everything, clothes, education, activities. I will install you in one of the suites of the mansion so that you will feel at home. I want you to feel safe, like a real family here. Elizabeth looked at him, unable to hide her emotion. Are you serious? Isn't this a temporary help? I never did anything halfway, Elizabeth, Christian replied, with a sincerity that made Elizabeth feel a pang in her heart. And you and your children are no exception. I want them to look back and know that when someone cared about them, it was because they genuinely wanted to make a difference. He paused, his eyes moving from the children to Elizabeth. I know this all seems surreal to you. I know we're just beginning to understand who we are to each other, but I won't let you go back to the daily struggle, that I know must have been enough. Here, you'll have a safe place, full of possibilities. Elizabeth felt a mixture of gratitude and distrust. It was as if, for a brief moment, she had been able to breathe in an ocean of possibilities that she had never imagined. But at the same time, a subtle fear began to take shape in her mind. "And what do you expect from us in return?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Christian looked at her with a gentle smile, touching her shoulder comfortingly. "Nothing. I just hope that you feel part of my life, like part of my family. I want them to grow up here, happy and safe. What you do with this chance is entirely up to you." Elizabeth looked at her children, and as she saw their curious bright eyes, her resistance seemed to begin to melt. She knew that by accepting this new path, she would be giving them a chance to grow up with more opportunities than she had ever had before. She sighed deeply, finally allowing relief to wash over her. I don't know how to thank you," Elizabeth said, her voice now thick with emotion. "Your children, I never imagined they would experience something like this." Christian smiled, the same confident, easy smile that she was beginning to recognize as sincere. "You don't have to thank me. Just enjoy it, Elizabeth. Let them grow here. They have so much to offer, and this will be the best place for them to do it." And as Christian's words echoed in the room, Elizabeth knew that a new stage in her life was beginning. It wasn't just about comfort or luxury. It was about the chance to give her children something she could never have offered them before, a real opportunity for growth and happiness. And deep down, she knew it would be a journey of transformation for all of them. The next day, Elizabeth woke with a shy but genuine smile. As she looked at her children still sleeping, their hearts calm and serene, she remembered Christian's words, a life full of possibilities, full of comfort and stability. But at the same time, her heart sank. She knew that material possessions weren't everything. Deep down, she believed that what really mattered were the bonds of love she could create with her children, the true love that sustained her life, even in the most difficult moments. While Christian was in the kitchen, preparing a simple but elegant breakfast, Elizabeth picked up her bag and walked to the garden where the children were playing, running back and forth. She sat in a chair nearby, watching them, and felt a tightness in her chest. She knew that this was a new chance, a new life for all of them. But she still had concerns about the real impact all of this would have on her children. "Is it going to be a fun day, Mommy?" asked Leora, one of the older daughters, running up to her with a charming smile on her face. Elizabeth smiled, stroking Leora's hair. "It's going to be the best day ever, honey. Let's make the most of it." When breakfast was served, everyone gathered around the table, laughing and chatting. Christian was smiling, and Elizabeth's children seemed overjoyed at the idea of a new beginning. After they had eaten, Christian announced, with a twinkle in his eye, that it was time to go shopping to update the children's wardrobe. He wanted to see them well dressed, and Elizabeth, although reluctant to accept the offer, knew that this gesture of affection was genuine. At the mall, the children were delighted with the colorful clothes and toys that were around. Elizabeth felt a quiet happiness at seeing her children so excited, but also a little uncomfortable with the idea of so much ostentation. She tried to remind herself that deep down, what really mattered was seeing her children happy, but there was still something inside her that told her that the simple things and the small joys were the most valuable. Christian, however, seemed to be enjoying himself. He was genuinely involved in the children's enthusiasm, helping them choose clothes and even playing with them amidst laughter and moments of pure fun. "Look, Mommy, look what Daddy bought me," Amandil exclaimed, smiling broadly, holding up a shiny jacket that reflected the store lights. Elizabeth looked at Christian, who was looking at his children with soft eyes, watching them lovingly. She felt something inside her shift. Maybe, just maybe, their lives could be more than the challenges she knew. Maybe the love and stability she could offer her children, along with Christian's support, would be more than enough to ensure a happy future for all of them. As they walked through the mall, Christian looked at Elizabeth and smiled. "You were right, Elizabeth. Money can make things easier, but what really matters is the connection you have with your children, and you already do that very well. I just want to be a part of it." Elizabeth was silent for a moment, pondering his words. She didn't know what the future held, but what she knew for sure was that right now she was surrounded by what truly mattered: the love her children had for each other and the growing affection between her and Christian. That day, with the laughter of the children echoing around her, she felt a sense of peace, a glimpse of true happiness. She knew the future would be challenging, but at the same time, she was more open to accepting what life had to offer, with the confidence that the most important thing, love, could never be bought, and that was something she already had in abundance. The day was calm and cheerful at the mansion. The children, now dressed in new clothes, were playing in the gardens while Elizabeth watched from a bench under a tree. The smile of satisfaction she wore at the sight of her children having fun seemed sincere, but there was still a slight cloud of worry in her heart. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time she felt hopeful. Suddenly, an elegant silhouette appeared at the mansion's main entrance, interrupting the moment of tranquility. It was a tall woman with dark skin and perfectly arranged hair, wearing a sophisticated dress that exuded confidence. She walked with a firm and purposeful step, as if she knew exactly where she was going. Elizabeth, who had been distracted, turned when she heard the sound of footsteps. Her eyes narrowed when she saw the woman approaching with an imposing posture. She was soon greeted by one of the mansion's servants, who led her to where Christian was, in the garden with the children. When the woman came closer, Christian, who was chatting animatedly with his children, looked at her with a broad smile, but soon the smile began to fade when he noticed the serious expression of the visitor. He recognized her immediately. "Aurora," Christian said with slight surprise in his voice. "What are you doing here? I didn't expect you so early." "I know this is a big surprise, but what is this, Christian?" Aurora replied in a controlled but firm voice. She glanced quickly at Elizabeth, who was now standing still and watching the scene. "I am Aurora Mendez Ortiz, your fiancée, and I came here because we are planning to get married, remember? But now, I see that—" She looked at the children with a critical eye, then turned her focus to Christian. "And these people, who are they? What are they doing here in your mansion?" Elizabeth felt a wave of discomfort. She tried to remain calm, but Aurora's question was direct and full of judgment. She was not prepared for a situation like this. As much as she tried to remain calm, she could not help but feel uncomfortable with the situation. Christian, visibly disconcerted, tried to take a deep breath before answering. "Aurora, I didn't explain it to you properly. These children, they are my children. I only found out about it recently. And Elizabeth, she is their mother." He was trying to find words that could explain the situation without sounding confused or hasty, but the tension in the air was palpable. Aurora looked at Christian, then at Elizabeth and the children, and an expression of disbelief took over her face. "Children? What do you mean, children? That doesn't make sense, Christian. You told me you never wanted children, that you couldn't have children." Christian felt the pressure of the moment increasing. He wanted to avoid confrontation, but Aurora's words left him in shock. I know, but something happened. Elizabeth and the children, they have something to do with my past. A past I didn't know existed. It's complicated, Aurora." He tried to explain himself, but Aurora's presence there, with her authoritative posture, made everything even more difficult. Aurora, however, did not seem willing to accept any simple explanation. "Complicated? She moved closer to Christian, keeping her tone sharp. I don't know what this means, but the truth is that I will not accept these people entering my life, Christian. I am your fiancé, and I came here to see the man I will marry, not this mess. Elizabeth, who had remained silent until then, felt a weight on her chest. She didn't know what was harder, facing Aurora's hostility or the fact that Christian seemed to be failing to defend himself the way she had expected. I'm not here to cause trouble, Elizabeth said in a firm but calm voice. I just want to make sure my children have a better life. And Christian has been good to us so far. Aurora looked at her with disdain. Good to you? He doesn't even know who you are. And I don't understand how he can just accept you and these children like that so suddenly. Christian finally took a more decisive stance, looking Aurora in the eyes. Aurora, I don't want to discuss this anymore. What matters now is that these children are part of my life, and Elizabeth is also part of it. What you do now is your choice, but my decision is made. I will not deny what happened. The tension in the air was almost unbearable. Aurora was silent for a moment before answering, her voice colder than ever. I will not accept this, Christian. Not like this. Christian was stunned, his thoughts jumbled as he tried to understand what had just happened. Aurora's look, mixed with surprise and disgust, left him confused. He didn't know what to say, how to justify the choice he had made, or how to explain the connection he was beginning to form with Elizabeth and her children. The weight of the situation was too great. Aurora, noticing Christian's silence, couldn't contain herself. I really need to understand this, Christian, she said with a bitter laugh. How could a man like you, someone with so much power and prestige, be interested in a woman like her? She gestured subtly at Elizabeth, who now looked more uncomfortable than ever. She has nothing, Christian. No money, no title. She's just a humble woman with nothing but her children. How could you fall in love with her? Elizabeth felt the question like a blow. Her chest tightened with pain and anger, but she stood her ground. Christian, on the other hand, seemed unable to find the right words. He looked at Aurora, at Elizabeth, and finally at his children, playing in the distance in the garden. The sound of their laughter was so pure, so genuine, that it seemed to bring a peace he hadn't felt in a long time. For a moment, he was speechless. Aurora's question echoed in his mind. How could he be interested in Elizabeth? The answer seemed simple, but it was also full of complexity. He wasn't sure what attracted him to her. It wasn't her looks, although they were beautiful. It was something deeper. It was the way she cared for her children, with a quiet strength that Christian never knew he would need in his life. It was the vulnerability she showed when she talked about her struggles, but also the determination to give her children the best, even when everything seemed impossible. He looked at Elizabeth, and her eyes shone with a sincerity he hadn't shown before. Aurora, it's not about what she has or doesn't have, he began, his voice firm but low. It's about who she is. She has something you can't see, something that goes far beyond money, power, or status. She is real. And she has shown me something I lost a long time ago, meaning. Aurora looked at him in disbelief, as if she didn't understand anything he was saying. Real? She laughed bitterly. That doesn't make sense, Christian. You've always had everything. You've always had what you wanted when you wanted it. What does she have that you need so much? Christian, his shoulders tense and his heart heavy, answered simply but with an intensity that surprised him. She makes me feel human, Aurora. With you, it's always about the next event, the next contract, the next party. But with Elizabeth, with her, I feel real. I see more than just money. I see love, responsibility, and a quiet strength that I never thought I'd need. Elizabeth, hearing his words, felt a mix of emotions. For the first time, she felt like someone saw her beyond her condition, beyond the hardships she'd faced. She'd spent so much time trying to survive, trying to make sure her children had the best, that she'd forgotten what it was like to feel seen. But now, with Christian's words, she felt a genuine connection, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Aurora, who seemed to be trying to digest Christian's words, finally looked at Elizabeth and with a sigh said, "I can't believe this. Are you choosing her over me?" She looked at Christian with an expression of disbelief and anger. "I'm the woman you were planning to marry. You can't throw all that away for some random woman?" Christian approached Aurora, his eyes now without the softness they had before. "I'm not throwing anything away, Aurora. I'm just choosing what's real, what really matters. I don't want to live on the surface anymore. It's not about who has more or who has less. It's about who I am and who makes me want to be better." The silence that followed was heavy. Aurora looked at him, then at Elizabeth, and finally at the children. She seemed completely lost, not knowing what to do or say. The confrontation, which seemed inevitable, was now taking a direction she had never imagined. Elizabeth, still in a state of confusion, didn't know what to expect. She had grown accustomed to being rejected, to being seen as inferior, and for the first time, she felt something changing. But was it real? She didn't know. But when she looked at the children, she saw that they had something that neither she nor Aurora could deny. They were at peace. They were happy. And as uncertain as the future was, she knew that deep down, that was all that mattered. Christian, his heart still racing from the tension of the moment, took a deep breath before turning fully to Elizabeth. Aurora's words still echoed in his mind, but he couldn't let them define who he was or what he truly felt. He needed to set the record straight, needed to be honest with Elizabeth. "I have nothing to do with Aurora," he said, his voice firm, looking Elizabeth straight in the eyes. "She's right about one thing. I never asked her to marry me. She's just a woman I was with, but she was never really what I wanted. I was never myself with her." Elizabeth, who was still trying to process the confrontation with Aurora and the conflicting feelings that had arisen, looked at him with a mixture of surprise and doubt. She wanted to believe him, but the intensity of the situation, the fact that Aurora was so clear about her feelings and her relationship with Christian, made her hesitate. "But you were going to marry her, Christian," Elizabeth said, her voice shaking a little. "She didn't seem like just a woman you were with. She seemed like more than that. How could you just discard her like that?" Christian felt the weight of his words, but he knew that deep down, he was being truthful. The relationship with Aurora had never been based on anything genuine, something he truly felt was right for him. It had been more of an expectation of his life, a pressure to conform to what people expected of him. But with Elizabeth, it was different. With her, he felt like he could be who he really was, without having to hide or live according to what others wanted. "I know, Elizabeth," he said, his voice softer now, as if he were opening up to her in a way he'd never done with anyone else. "I was following an expectation, maybe trying to find something I thought I needed. But with you, it's different. It's not about what society expects of us. It's about what I really want." He took a step closer to her, his gaze fixed on her eyes. "And what I want is to be with you. And it's not because of what you have or don't have, but because of who you are. I don't care what the world thinks. I only care about what you and your children mean to me." Elizabeth, touched by his words, felt something inside her shift. She had always been so focused on surviving, on ensuring a better future for her children, that she had never had time to think about what she really wanted for herself. But now, with Christian's words, she began to question if it was possible to have something more than just the daily struggle for survival. Maybe, just maybe, there was room for something more genuine. "I don't know what the future holds, Christian," she said, her eyes shining with a mix of uncertainty and hope. "But maybe we can try to find out together. I just don't want you to regret this in the end. I'm not like the other women you've met." "I know that," Christian replied, his voice full of certainty. "And that's what makes me want to be with you. I'm not looking for perfection, Elizabeth. I just want to be with someone who's real, someone who will show me what it's like to live." The tension that had once hovered between them began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of understanding, a connection that, despite its recentness, felt much deeper than anything he'd ever experienced. Christian knew there were many challenges ahead, that the road ahead would be difficult and full of obstacles. But in that moment, he also knew that he was ready to face them. To him, Elizabeth and their children meant more than anything he'd achieved thus far. Elizabeth took a step forward, feeling a small flame of hope ignite within her. "I don't want empty promises, Christian," she said, her voice firmer now. "But I'm willing to try together." Christian smiled, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. He didn't know what the future would bring, but at that moment, with Elizabeth by his side, he felt like he was on the right path. And that, more than anything, was what mattered. Christian's grandmother dropped a bombshell that left everyone stunned. Her words hung in the air, like a bomb about to explode. "Christian, you had a vasectomy, didn't you?" she said, with an almost supernatural calm, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He froze for a moment, his mind trying to process what he had just heard. He had had the surgery years ago, after a series of complicated health issues. At the time, it had been a decision he had made alone, with a doctor, without telling anyone. Not that it was something shameful, but simply a personal decision. And now, somehow, his grandmother knew about it. "Grandma, how do you know that?" Christian asked, his voice cracking slightly, still trying to understand. The surprise in her eyes was evident, but there was something else, a discomfort, a sense of invasion, as if his grandmother had crossed a line he never imagined would be crossed. The grandmother smiled slightly, with a mysterious and serene look. "I know many things, my dear. I always knew you would make a decision like this, even if you didn't talk about it with anyone. I saw in your eyes, in the way you dealt with things, that this was the path you would choose." Christian felt a chill down his spine, a whirlwind of thoughts taking over his mind. His grandmother was a woman with wisdom that went far beyond what he imagined. She had never been invasive, but she had always known how to see things that no one else could see. "But that doesn't make sense, Grandma," he said, looking at her with an expression of confusion. "I couldn't know that I had biological children, especially with Elizabeth. If I had a vasectomy, how is that possible?" The grandmother looked at him with a soft but intense gaze. "My dear, life has its own ways of surprising us. Sometimes we can make choices based on a perception of control, but fate has a way of showing us that control is not really in our hands." Christian swallowed hard, trying to process her words as his mind began to rearrange itself. He remembered everything about that period of the vasectomy, the clinic, the doctor, the pain. But there was one thing he couldn't understand. How could Elizabeth have had children with him if he believed he was no longer capable of having children? "Are you telling me that the surgery had no effect?" Christian asked, his voice shaking with uncertainty. Grandma shook her head slowly, a slight smile on her lips. "No, my dear. Science has its limitations, and there are things that medicine cannot control. You may feel that you have made a definitive choice, but there is always something bigger at stake. You are still the father of these children in some way." Christian was stunned. The idea that his vasectomy could have failed was almost absurd, something he had never even considered. But looking at Grandma, he knew that she was right about something. She had always known more than he had imagined. There was a wisdom about her, a connection to the world around her that transcended any logical explanation. "So, Elizabeth, are the children really my children?" he murmured, almost as if he were asking himself more than Grandma. "Yes, my dear," she replied softly, "and that is why fate brought you back to them. You are destined to be a father, to be a part of their lives. It may not have been planned, but sometimes the most beautiful things in life are not." Those words had a profound effect on Christian. He looked at his grandmother with gratitude, but also with a certain fear of what lay ahead. The things he thought he knew about his life were falling apart, revealing hidden layers of a future he had never imagined. And once again, he felt the weight of the responsibility he now carried. Being a father, not just to one child, but to 4, and with a woman like Elizabeth by his side. Christian's grandmother smiled, as if she could see the future before her, while he, still in shock, tried to adjust to the new reality that life had somehow thrown his way. Christian's grandmother looked at him with a gaze filled with wisdom and serene peace. Those words seemed to float in the air between them, like a truth she had known all along, but now she was finally sharing. "I knew it, my dear," she began, her voice soft and steady. "I knew you couldn't have biological children, like medicine had said, but Elizabeth was a miracle. Things in life have their own ways, and we don't always follow the logic of the world." Christian felt as if a wave of emotions suddenly hit him. He didn't fully understand what his grandmother meant, but something in the way she spoke made him believe every word. He had always known that his grandmother had a deep connection with the world, an almost magical intuition. But now, she was talking about something that went beyond the natural, something that seemed to transcend reason. "But how can it be, Grandma?" Christian asked, still trying to understand the magnitude of it all. "How can it be a miracle? If I had a vasectomy, it wasn't possible for me to have children." The grandmother smiled softly, her eyes full of compassion. "I know, dear. I saw everything, every detail. Medicine, science, may have told you it wouldn't be possible. But what you didn't know, what you didn't imagine, is that Elizabeth had a purpose in your life. Sometimes, what science tells us isn't all that matters. Fate has its own rules, and Elizabeth was the key to something you couldn't see." Christian was silent, trying to absorb what was being said. The grandmother's words were like a deep truth that he still couldn't fully grasp. Elizabeth and the children were part of something bigger, something he hadn't planned, but that was right there in front of him, defying all expectations and certainties. "So you're saying that Elizabeth was chosen to be the mother of my children, even though I can't have children?" Christian asked, his voice full of disbelief. "Is that possible?" "Yes," the grandmother replied, with a confidence that seemed unshakable. "It was a miracle, an intervention that goes beyond human comprehension. Elizabeth was the gift that life gave him. She and her children are part of his destiny, no matter what the world says." Christian felt a lump in his throat as his emotions mixed in a whirlwind. He thought about all the times he had questioned his life, his own paths and choices. Now somehow everything made sense, or at least it was starting to. He could no longer deny what his eyes were seeing. Elizabeth and her children were his family. Not in a planned way, but in a way that the universe had designed for him, even if he didn't know it. "So, what do I do now?" Christian murmured, more to himself than to his grandmother, his gaze lost as he tried to accept this new reality. "I never thought I would be a father. I never thought I would have children." His grandmother smiled, her gaze full of tenderness. "You do what your heart tells you, my dear. The rest will come naturally. Now you have a family to care for, to love. That's what matters." Her words echoed in his mind, and for the first time in a long time, Christian felt a sense of peace, as if something that had been missing in his life had finally fallen into place. He looked at his grandmother, her eyes now calmer. She was right. He didn't know exactly what the future held, but one thing was certain. His life would never be the same again, and he was ready to find out what that meant. He took a deep breath, a slight smile on his face. "So, Grandma, I guess it's time for you to be a father, huh?" His grandmother just smiled back, a smile full of love and understanding, as she nodded. "Yes, my dear. Now you have a new journey ahead of you. Enjoy every moment." His grandmother's words still echoed in Christian's mind, but it was Elizabeth's soft voice that brought him back to the present. She approached him with a gentle look, her eyes full of understanding and support. "Christian," she said with a tenderness he had never imagined, "children are part of your life. You have that capacity. You can be a good father, even if you didn't plan it. They are yours, just the way you are now, just the way you are." Christian looked at her, his chest tight and his heart pounding. He didn't know how to respond, didn't know how to express all the confusion, relief and gratitude that were taking over his body. But Elizabeth's words, simple and sincere, touched a part of him that he didn't even know existed. With tears in his eyes, he turned to his children, who were playing carefree in the gardens of the mansion. The children's laughter was like a soft melody that filled the air. He watched them, seeing traces of himself in each of them. Amandil, Leora, Zahara, and Amatus were there, his family, and he would never have imagined them, but there they were, with him, forever. Christian felt the weight of emotion take over him. He didn't know exactly what was happening inside his heart, but he knew that something big, something life-changing, was unfolding before him. Tears began to roll down his face, unexpected, like a river that had finally found its way to the sea. "I never imagined this would be possible," he said, his voice shaking as he looked at Elizabeth, who stood beside him with a supportive look. "I never thought I could be a father. I never imagined I would have children. And now here they are. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to begin." Elizabeth placed a gentle hand on his arm, offering him the comfort he so desperately needed. "You've already started, Christian. They have you now. And you have them. That's all that matters. The love you have in your heart will be more than enough." Elizabeth's words were like a balm to Christian's soul, and for the first time in a long time, he felt a peace that had been foreign to him before. He had never had a family, nor the love he now felt for these children and for Elizabeth. But somehow, everything was falling into place. He was becoming the person he never thought he could be. I'm going to do my best, Elizabeth," he said with newfound determination. "I'm going to be their father. I'm going to give it my all, because I know that right now, there's nothing more important than this." Elizabeth smiled, a smile full of confidence, as if she already knew that Christian was ready for this journey. "I know, Christian, and together we'll make it all work out." Christian wiped the tears from his face and for the first time felt genuine hope blossom within him. He knew the challenges were just beginning, but as he looked at Elizabeth and his children, he felt something he had never felt before, the certainty that he now had a family. He was no longer alone. And with that thought, he took a step forward, ready to embrace the future. The silence that followed the emotional moment was filled only by the sound of children playing in the garden and the soft whisper of the wind passing through the trees. Christian, his heart still racing, looked deeply into Elizabeth's eyes. He didn't know how he had gotten there, how the threads of fate had intertwined in such a surprising way. But at that moment, with his life so unexpectedly transformed, he knew that one thing was clear in his heart. "Elizabeth," he began, his voice firm, but with a softness that reflected everything he felt. "I don't know what I did to deserve this, but I love you. I love you in a way I never thought possible. I, who have always sought emptiness in things, now know that what I was looking for was inside me all along." Elizabeth looked at him, the smile on her lips widening, and her gaze reflected a combination of relief and happiness. "I love you too, Christian," she said, her voice soft, full of sincerity. "And I know that together we can make our lives incredible, not because of what we have, but because of who we are." Elizabeth's words touched Christian's heart deeply. He had sought wealth, material success, status, something to fill a void within him. But there, in that moment, with her by his side and his children playing with the freedom of a carefree life, he understood clearly. True wealth was not in the things he owned, but in what he now had around him: love, family, and true bonds. At that moment, Christian's grandmother, who had been watching the scene with a tender smile, slowly approached. Already tired from illness, but with a vibrant spirit, she was finally able to witness the union she had so longed for her grandson. "I always knew," she said in a soft voice full of gratitude, "that love was the true key. And now I see that my grandson has found what his soul has been searching for. What joy!" Christian felt the warmth of his grandmother's words invade his chest. He looked at her with teary eyes, and she, with her wisdom, completed the sentence that had begun his transformation. "True wealth, my dear, is not in what we have, but in who we are, in the love we share and the kindness we offer to others. And today, I see that you have found the greatest treasure of all." With that, Christian looked at Elizabeth once more. He knew that his life, from now on, would be completely different. It didn't matter what the future held. He had found what truly mattered, and the wealth he had always sought was right there, beside him, in the form of family, love, and commitment. "Now, Elizabeth," he said with a genuine smile, "I know what it truly means to be rich." And so, with his grandmother's blessing and everyone's support, Christian and Elizabeth began a new journey together. The message that true wealth was not in things, but in who we are and what we share, spread like a soft flame, illuminating the path ahead. What was once empty and lonely was now complete, filled with love and the certainty that together they would be unbeatable. Did this story move you? Then leave your like on this video, subscribe to our channel, and activate the notification bell. By doing so, you will not miss our next moving story. Stay until the end, and there will be 2 more videos for you. I am sure they will also move you.